Hello, everybody. And in this video, I wanted to talk about the 16 critical infrastructure sectors and why they're important when we talk about industrial control or operational technology uh, security. A lot of times when we start talking, especially with new folks to come into cybersecurity and industrial controls and OT, there's a lot of confusion around just because of all the different terms and whether we talk about ICS or OT or SCADA, all these different acronyms, and then we start talking about critical infrastructure versus well, what's not critical. There can be a lot of confusion. So I do like to take all of the different look, look at everything from different aspects, and one is to kind of take a step back and look at the different critical infrastructure sectors, or in this case, if you want, this is how the U.S. government and CISA define essentially critical infrastructure for the United States. Right, the idea is that these different areas, we can't live without. Society can't live without these, and if we had any issues in any of these areas, there's significant repercussions. And that's why when I always think about industrial control security, my main focus is always this idea that what happens if this facility goes down, and it's not a question of if it goes down for a couple of hours. If a power plant goes down for a couple hours, we can live without electricity for a few hours, and that's okay. But when hours becomes days and days could potentially become weeks or months or so on and so forth, you can just imagine the repercussions, the fallout that happens from those extended outages, right? The longer they go on, the impact only exponentially increases. So again, I just wanted to take this kind of brief look to look at some of these sectors at a very high level. And you can see there's 16 that CISA have defined, and if you can see the URL at the bottom is where you can go actually to the CISA page and actually look at additional details on each of these. And there's a lot of great information, especially like in chemical and energy, if you really want to dig into it even further, right? Or you can just Google for CISA critical, I think, infrastructure sectors, and it'll pull up the page for you. So there's a lot of great information that's there, and that'll help let you dive into those. But I wanted to look at the first one when they talk about chemical, and chemical as a sector is actually broken down into four different groupings, if you will. So they have basic chemicals. They talk about specialty, agricultural, and then consumer. So everything from the sprays and that you can buy at the store to clean your kitchen and bathroom to pesticides, right? That we spray in the fields that we come back and talk about in one of the later sectors when we talk about food and agriculture. And that's one of those themes that you'll see as we go throughout is this idea that so many of the sectors play off of each other and they're dependent in a lot of different ways on each other. But the chemical sector is made up of, they talk about even on the site, hundreds of thousands of, just in the United States, think of chemical and petrochemical facilities that are responsible for creating, building, and making all of these different chemicals that we use in our lives. Um, I do think back to 2017, where we had the Trident or Trisis incident, which was where a nation state adversary had taken control over the SIS systems, or the safety instrumented systems, at a petrochemical facility in the Middle East. And it's that one known cybersecurity incident in control systems where the attackers were taking over that SIS, that backup failsafe system, right? That shuts down the plan in case anything happens. So the whole point of that system is to protect life, right? It's protect physical harm from coming to the people on the site. And that the idea was the attackers had taken control, 99.9% of the control. They had one little coding error, which prevented them from having complete control. but it demonstrates that there are attackers out there and they are targeting these environments. And in that case, potentially to create some type of explosion, destroy the facility, and have an impact at the end of the day, killing people. So, of course, we can imagine there's a lot of focus in industrial control security around the chemical sector space, especially since Trident and the Trisis incident. Now, commercial facilities comes up, and so there's less of a focus on more industrial control or operational technology security. Right? In this case, we're typically looking more from a physical security aspect. And commercial facilities is pretty much anything where the public can go, which is very general, very broad. Though you talk about whether it's you can see a sporting event at a stadium, whether it's a shopping mall, amusement park. So I always think of, I met the gentleman at Disney that's responsible for cybersecurity for all of the rides. Right, that's a pretty fun industrial control job for sure. Right, but zoos, museums, even hotels, the list goes on and on. Any place essentially that the public can go to. So again, we're typically concerned more with physical security in those cases, but there's also an aspect of OT or ICS security when we think of things like building management systems. So making sure that elevators are secure, air conditioning, heating, right, proper ventilation, a lot of those common systems that we see from building management systems. We make sure that if there's secure badge readers that are used to access sensitive areas in those locations by authorized personnel, right? Those are kept secure. Uh, and so there's definitely a lot of security concerns. Most fall inside the physical realm, but there's definitely some operational technology concerns there is in addition to, right? We talk about communications, and so much of what we do in today's world is based off of communications, whether we think of the internet or point-to-point communication, or we'll talk about, a lot of the other different fields, especially, with sectors like emergency services and how critical communications is to dispatch for fire, for police, other first responders. Right? But how much of the world we live in based off on communications when you think of power transmission and distribution, right? We're monitoring those lines. We're using SCADA, which is just really a fancy acronym, if you want, for industrial control security and management and operations, going over some type of wide area link. And so we're reaching out to the field to pull back information from those remote systems. Right? That's all done over some type of communication link. So if we don't have those communication links, we lose that ability to monitor those remote systems. We lose the ability to control those remote systems and ensure their security and availability. And there's critical manufacturing, and critical manufacturing, at least to me, is more of the focus of any manufacturing facility that produces goods that is used by any of the other critical infrastructure sectors. You think so? Where we talk about metals, they start to talk about all the different machinery that are used in all of these other different sectors. Right? We want to make sure that we're able to receive those goods and continue operations. I need to make sure I'm able to buy parts to be able to maintain my chemical refinery or petrochemical facility. Right. Um, so there's this idea of manufacturing. Manufacturing is one of those areas that probably doesn't get a lot of love in ICS OT cybersecurity a lot of times, because I think it's sometimes seen as maybe too simple of an environment for some. But it's very important nonetheless, and it shouldn't be taken any less seriously than any of the other environments where we focus on control system security. So, look at dams, and dams are interesting. It's another one of those that doesn't get a lot of focus from an ICS OT perspective, but there's a lot that depends on dams. I'm always reading about the water shortages in the western, especially the southwestern portion of the United States, right? And so much of that and irrigation into the farms, supporting agriculture, right, and food that it comes from the dams within that system in the Southwest, which is really interesting, right? Dams can be used for power generation. So when we go back to talking about energy, right? Shipping that's done based off of the different waterways that become available from the dams, plays into waste management, water management, and of course, unfortunately, we saw the recent loss of the dam in the Ukraine, where you don't have to go far to see the repercussions of what happens when dams fail. Right, so there's definitely another important sector that doesn't get a lot of attention, but definitely should. And there's a lot of great defenders in that field. So there's a defense industrial base, which I always find very fascinating. And Fluor, the company I work for in my day job, is part of the defense industrial base. Right, we're a contractor to the United States government that helps support the government's missions in different places around the world. For example, we had supported the army bases in Afghanistan. So if you would go into the mess hall, right, or the kitchen for dinner at one of those bases, it's not a soldier that's the cook or cleaning the dishes or serving the food. It's a floor employee. And so that's kind of an example of the defense industrial base. It's the contractors, the subcontractors that help support the government in their different missions around the world. And so again, it's another one of those. There's not as much of a focus on ICS OT security, but more physical security, and then probably more of a traditional IT cybersecurity perspective. But also going back, there's some ICS and OT considerations there with things like building management systems and anything sports that would plug into physical security and helping there. So they talk about emergency services. Another one of those areas that's very critical to the society today and making sure that we can get first responders there. We learned a lot of those lessons, ideally during COVID, but the police, the medical, first responders, fire, that come out to save us when we need them, right? And going back to communication, right? Being able to dispatch those services, being able to for somebody to contact 911, at least in the United States, right? To contact emergency services is an essential service. Right? So again, it's making sure all of those fundamental services that support the emergency services, the first responders, right, are there and they're always available. So, and my favorite, and probably the one area that gets the most focused in industrial control security is energy. It's my favorite because my first project for industrial control security was actually a large power plant, one of the larger power plants in the Western Hemisphere. And so it was really exciting to get to go on site and then be able to see as it's being energized and just the electricity in the air around you was pretty phenomenal. But whether we talk about a power plant generating power or sending power out over transmission lines, so when we talk about transmission and then distribution, right, how we take that power and get it to homes and businesses where they can actually take in and use that energy. Right? Again, that probably has the most focus in a from an ICS OT cybersecurity perspective, right? To make sure that that plan is always continually generating, or that we do have continuous transmission and distribution of power, because it goes back to the we can live with the power goes off for a couple hours, not the end of the world, but once it gets to 6 hours or 12 hours or a couple days, I mean, and then just the repercussions just rise exponentially. So there's definitely always a large focus around energy. We talk about financial services. So this is one that has probably more of a traditional IT cybersecurity focus when we talk about ensuring the stability of financial services. When we I think of the NotPetya example that Andy Greenberg highlighted in his Sandworm book, where NotPetya took out essentially all financial services in the Ukraine, and so you had somebody trying to rushing to the store to buy food, and that they try to use their ATM card or the debit card or credit card, and it doesn't go through because all of the systems are down. So, well, they try to go to the ATM to get cash, and there's all the ATM functionality is down. You start to think of all those repercussions again, the impact. So there's more of again a traditional IT cybersecurity focus there, but doesn't make it any less important. It's just not as much of a strong industrial control or OT perspective. Food and agriculture is definitely one that probably is another one that's taken taken for granted a lot of times. But when you look at where our food comes from and making sure our food gets to our table and into our stomachs safely. Um, that it was interesting. There was actually just a recent activist attack against farms in the Jordan Valley in Israel, where they had knocked off all the systems that were responsible for watering the fields in the Jordan Valley. It wasn't the end of the world. The workers could go and just switch to manual operations and still water the fields. It wasn't the end of the world. Um, but you start thinking of in more sensitive environments, like a nuclear power plant. You don't necessarily want your systems to go down and then just say, okay, we'll just send in a worker, an employee to go ahead and manually operate the facility, right? There's definitely a lot of security and safety considerations that we have there. But food and agriculture is obviously I don't very important to our life. And it depends on so many other sectors. So we talked right, the chemical sector for pesticides, which we talked about earlier, or obviously the water, making sure that we're able to water the fields and grow plants, right? Energy and things like transportation. It's so much that it depends on, and we all depend on it as well as all these others. They talk about government facilities. This is another one that's more probably traditional, more IT cybersecurity. And we also look physical security, and there's a component of OT, like when we talk about things like building management systems and secure badging, so making sure only authorized personnel enter into certain areas of that installation. And so government facilities actually covers federal, state, local, tribal buildings. So any government building within the United States, and then it also includes. It's interesting. So national labs. So Flora actually manages and runs a few of the national labs. Different military installations, courthouses, and so on. So a lot of importance there. Healthcare is one of those another that doesn't get a lot of attention. It got a lot of attention, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, of course, and we saw the the impact to doctors and nurses. But we get sick or we need to, it's an emergency, we want to be able to go to the hospital. I've had a procedure, so I've been on I haven't had like surgery, but I've had a procedure. So I've been on a table, right, where they knock you out and they have instruments inside your body, right? It's I always, what would happen if there was a attack against those systems? What if the systems went down? Right. And healthcare for me, hospitals are very interesting because there's definitely a physical security component. There's an IT cyber security component, and then there's a industrial control or an OT component as well. So you look at different systems that are used in the emergency room, the operating room. We always joke about the $4 million MRI machine that runs on Windows XP, but it's true. Right? We have to make sure that those all stay secure and available to ensure that doctors and nurses and other staff can take care of their patients. So, and then we talk about IT. IT is another one I group into, like with communications. It's almost just it's kind of this commodity, right? That we just assume is there, and we have that connectivity, and we have the systems. I think of all the the data centers that support cloud, and how cloud has changed our lives, especially over the last 5-10 years, and changed business in the world we live in, and what would happen if we lost those capabilities. There's a very importance there a lot. Of course, again, more of a traditional IT cybersecurity focus, but there's some OT considerations there for sure. Nuclear reactors, materials, wave. That's another big one. Like with just energy in general, right? Because we think of the most dangerous type of energy generation, like what could happen with we think of all the way going back all the way to the 3 Mile Island or uh, looking at Chernobyl or the fears of having some type of nuclear reactor um, issue, right? So there's always a strong focus on cybersecurity as well as physical security and IT security in these environments, but as well as those nuclear materials before and after use, right? And how do we properly and safely as possible, right, dispose of that waste? We talk about I think see water, and then where we look at how it touches so many aspects of all of these different sectors, as well as, of course, making sure we have things like clean drinking water or being able to cook or being able to go to the hospital where clean water services are essential and et cetera. So it's definitely one of those areas where it's another one that's underserved from an ICS OT cybersecurity perspective. It doesn't make it any less important than any of these other sectors. Right? And then we talk about transportation, right? Getting people from point A to point B, right? Safely is really what it comes down to. I've got to do been very fortunate lately, especially to do more and more work in transportation and commuter rail. So, being able to look at the systems that are responsible for moving the train. If a train comes up to an intersection, right, you want to make sure that all the guards that come down in place, so that way cars and people, right, pedestrians are not moving in front of the train where you could have potentially somebody seriously hurt or more than likely killed, unfortunately, right? So you take that very safe, the safety concerns very seriously. What happens if the person responsible for driving the train, well, if they do have that stereotypical um, kind of conversation, but what happens if they have a heart attack or they pass out or they have a seizure and they're not able to slow down the train as it comes up to a curve and the train's going at a high speed, right? Make sure that we're able to slow down the train, through automated controls, safety controls. In that instance, so again, we're protecting the safety, the lives of the people that are on the rail itself. So all very important aspects. But again, it's again, I like taking the time to look at the different sectors. So when we talk about industrial control security, as well as we're really talking about in industrial and industrial environment and what does that mean, and from the U.S. government perspective, right? These are the critical infrastructure and environments. So when we hear critical infrastructure, right? And these industrial type of environments. Most of these are, I guess, industrial. We don't necessarily throw in things like critical or emergency services per se, but the importance of when we look at these environments and then looking at each again, and what happens when one doesn't becomes unavailable for a couple of hours versus a couple of days or a couple of months, right? What is the impact? And that's, to me, that's what we're protecting in industrial control security, right? In operational technology, cybersecurity. So, so I appreciate everybody's time for checking out the video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please don't hesitate to reach out, and you can find me on LinkedIn at Mike Holcomb. All right, thanks again. Take care.